Psalm chapter 54. To the chief magician on Nigaroth, Mishael, a psalm of David, when Ziphians came and said to Saul, Doth not David hide himself with us? Psalm 54. Save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. Behold, God is mine helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in thy truth. I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he hath delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessings of your word. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to consider your word tonight in regards to the Ziphians who delivered David into the hand of Saul, and how that you, because of your will, delivered David out of that hand. Lord, I pray that we will see the importance of this passage, the importance of following your will. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so in this passage, the subscript says, to the chief magician on Nigaroth, Mishael, a psalm of David. So the chief magician is the guy head of the choir and so forth, and they're going to sing this, and they're going to sing it on Nigaroth, which is basically on stringed instruments. And then it is a Mishael, a contemplation. A Mishael means basically, a Mashiel is basically a contemplation with understanding. We understand something or the situation behind the song, and so as we are singing it, we understand what we are singing, and we are contemplating on what we understand. And so that is what a Mishael is that it's something you know the background of, and then you understand it, and then therefore you see how that God is going to work. And so in life we understand that there are things that God does, and his character. David says here, save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. So God's character, we know that he cannot lie, he's always truthful, he is always righteous, and he's always holy. And there are things that because of his character he cannot do, but there's also things because of his character that he will always do. And because we know how he will react in a situation because he is consistently righteous, that's basically what, when it says, save me by thy name, his description of who he is. You know, when we talk about God in the Old Testament, we're always talking about the God who sees, the God who helps, the God who is, and then it's basically El Shaddai or El Jehovah Jireh and all these things. It's basically, it is his name, the God that is, and then a adjective that kind of describes who he is. It's a descriptive verb or something that says that he's a helper, he's the one who sees, he sees my needs, and all these different things. And so these descriptions of God are his name. You know, every time we talk about the names of God, and then the list about 67, 80, you know, just different names, is basically God who is, and then a descriptive help who that God is. And so all those names are God's name. And so when he says, save me, O God, by thy name, he's basically saying, save me by your character, the things that describe who you are. If God is always a helper of the righteous, then we know that he'll always help the righteous, right? And so that there it goes. And he says, and judge me by thy strength. It doesn't matter if somebody desires to help you, that they have no ability to help you. And so here in this passage is talking about not only is God descriptive, his name descriptive of what he will do for you or wants to do for you, his strength shows that he can do it. He is able to do it. And he says, hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth, for strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. They have not set God before them. Selah. So this Selah means to think about what he just said. To think about what he just said. So this psalm is talking about the Ziphians. The Ziphians are basically, remember we talked about Zoag in Psalm 52, Doag the Edomite in Psalm 52, where he killed all the priests for unknowingly helping David flee from Saul. And so Doeg waited for the proper moment after David had left, and then he desired, because we understood that Doeg hated the priests that were in the temple there, and so he desired to have the people at the temple destroyed. And so Doeg created a situation in which King Saul wants to get David. And so he says, hey, look, all these priests, help David. And the priests didn't know anything about it. Help David against you. And then Doeg made up this story, making it seem like the priests were trying to overthrow King Saul. And then King Saul, in the process of trying to get David, got angry at the priest and wanted his men to kill him. But all the men were like, no, we're not touching God's priest. And then he commands Doeg, hey, Doeg, you go kill them. And Doeg doesn't even hesitate. He kills all 72 priests, and then he kills everybody at the town the priests were at, just for good measure. And so he created mischief because he hated those priests, because they were disciplining him spiritually. He was delayed there when he saw David there, and so he found out a way mischievously to destroy God's priests. And so that was Psalm 52. Now Psalm 54 is what happened after the incident with Doeg the Edomite at the temple, where he kills all those people and kills all the people at that. In Psalm 20, in Samuel chapter, 1 Samuel chapter, I believe it is chapter 22, that is when he killed the priest. And then chapter 23 is where he goes on and hides into this area. And then as he is hiding, let's go ahead and go to 1 Samuel chapter 23 and look at the background of what's going on with these Ziphians. So in chapter 22, he destroys Nob, and Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, with men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep, at the edge of the sword. And the sons of Abimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. So the only priest that was left was Abiathar, and he escaped from the city of Nob, and then with the ephod, which has the Ur and the Thummim in it, and he escapes to David with the ephod, so that now David can communicate with God even while he's on the run with that. And instead of going to the temple for the ephod, the ephod is now with David. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew this day that when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he had occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be a safeguard. And so they're on the run now. And then chapter 23, he says, then they told David, saying, behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah. And so while this is all going on, Samuel is angry at David for being anointed. David didn't necessarily have a choice in this. Samuel comes along, tells King Saul, hey, because of your rebellion and not obeying God and giving false sacrifice, the kingdom's no longer yours. I'm going to go anoint somebody else. And so then Samuel anoints King David, and then eventually Saul finds out about this, and that's what causes his anger to overwhelm, because he's in rebellion against God. Remember this, and that God had anointed him originally, but then God took it away from him and gave it to David. And so now he's rebelling against God's command that David be the new anointed king over all of Israel. And so he's busy fighting against David. And while he's busy fighting against David, the Philistines come along and say, hey, here's an opportunity to get back at the children of Israel. So while he's spending all the reason, because remember, the reason why God had a king in the first place, and then one of the reasons was in 1 Samuel chapter 9, he says, in verse 16, it says, tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines, for I have looked upon my people, because their cry has come unto me. So the whole reason King Saul became a king was so that he could protect Israel from the Philistines. But because he's so busy trying to fight against David, the Philistines, the whole reason he's a king, are able to attack once again. And then notice this here is they told David, saying, behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah, and they rob the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and smite the Philistines? or should I hide? What should I be doing? And the Lord said unto David, Go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. So we understand that David's anointed king to protect Israel now, but he is not coordinated king yet. He was anointed by Samuel to be the king, but he has not gotten that position yet. And yet, even though it's not his job to do this just yet, he asks God, should I do this? And God says, yes, you should protect Israel even while you are a fugitive. And so here's King Saul busy trying to fight against David and neglecting his obligation as a king to protect Israel. And then here's David, a fugitive from King Saul, and yet he's doing the will of God and protecting Israel. And so it's quite interesting is that people, the battle lines are being drawn, people are taking sides, and they're trying to figure out who's to be with who. It is quite interesting that today a lot of people, they see people doing the will of the Lord. Maybe somebody in the early ministry was doing the will of the Lord properly and correctly, and then maybe because of jealousy of somebody else or because of their empire, if you will, their great ministry actually starts taking off and getting some worth, and God starts blessing, and then instead of continuing in the will of the Lord, they start taking advantage, kind of like Saul did with Israel, taking advantage of God's people to do his will and starting to fear the people rather than God. And then he gets his eyes off of God, and then he sees that God stops blessing his ministry and starts blessing another ministry, and then they get jealous, and then they start fighting against that other ministry rather than doing the will of the Lord. We see this all the time, is that people get their eyes off of God and start fighting against other ministries. How that Christ said that at the latter times that people would say the Lord delayeth his coming, and then start beating their fellow servants for one reason or another. You know how tempers will flare over the littlest things, and they would, rather than focusing on the Lord in their ministry gets redirected from what the Lord called them to do, save souls and to preach the gospel, to always fighting all these little fires that are coming up against them and not trusting in the Lord. So here he says, David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and smite the Philistines? And he said, Go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. So he goes there and he saves them. And David said unto his men, Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? So his men are like, Hey, we're fugitives here in our own land. Why should we fight against them? And then David inquired of the Lord yet again. The Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thy hand. So David and his men went down to Keilah and with the Philistines, and brought away their cattle and smote them with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And it came to pass, when Abiathar the son of Abimelech fled to David to Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. It was told Saul that David was come to Keilah. And Saul said, God hath delivered him in my hand, for he is shut in by entering into a town that hath gates and bars. So David's just finished saving this town from the Philistines, and then the guy who's supposed to be protecting the town from the Philistines is like, oh no, I got David right where I want him. You know, rather than being concerned about rejoicing about the great victory that God gave David in protecting this town so that God's people would be protected, he's focused on how he can entrap David. That is where his mind is. And Saul called the people together to war. Shouldn't he have called the people together to war before? But no, he's not concerned about protecting from the Philistines, about God's people, because remember, he's jealous and he's all self-centered right now. And so he's focused about defending his own heritage. And David knew that Saul secretly practiced mischief against him. And Abiathar the priest bring hither the ephod. And David said, Lord God of Israel, my servant hath certainly heard that Saul seeketh to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. So the Philistines are trying to harm Keilah. David protects Keilah. Now Saul wants to come against Keilah and destroy Keilah for his sake. You see, when people get jealous for themselves and not focused on the Lord's ministry, they'll stop protecting God's people, and then in order to spite the people that they're jealous for, will cause harm to come upon God's people. And this happens all the time in ministries that start getting big. They stop focusing on the Lord and they start focusing on other people. And some fiend wrong that had been done to them or whatever, or they'll always make up an excuse, but the end result is always the same. They focus on destroying that individual rather than continuing in the proper ministry. Then David said, O Lord God of Israel, my servant hath certainly heard that Saul seeketh to come to Keilah. Notice that Saul's focused on destroying David, but David is focused on, God, what do you want me to do? How should I handle this situation? Notice where his mind is at with God. Will the men of Keilah deliver me up to his hand? So he just finished saving the people of Keilah, and he's like, God, are these guys going to be with me because I helped them? And he says, and will Saul come down as thy servant hath heard? O Lord God of Israel, I beseech thee, tell thy servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. And David said, will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will deliver thee up. There's no protection there. He spent all that time trying to protect these men of the people of Israel, and the people of Israel are like, oh, we're going to hand you over. You know, they're not focused. They don't have the mind of God on their side. And David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah and went whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah and forbare to go forth. And David abode in the wilderness in the strongholds and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. So he's now in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. So God is opposing King Saul. So when you stop getting your eyes off of God and start focusing on your own little jealousies, your own little tits for tats and all these things, and you're fighting against other ministries, fighting against other people with all your little excuses, then God is even going to oppose you, in particular when, because of your jealousy, you don't notice that that man you're fighting against is actually doing the will of the Lord and is focused on God. And so here he's in the wilderness of Ziph, and Saul is seeking him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. So God's not letting him find him. And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And here's the interesting part. You know, King Saul is looking all over for him, can't find him. Jonathan, a friend of David and the son of Saul, goes right out to him. He knows exactly where he is. It's so easy to find him. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David into the wood and strengthened his hand in God. He says, hey, you know, I know the mind of God. I know that God is there. You see, the reason why Jonathan could see David and find David is because he set God before him. Remember in our psalm here it says, for strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek after my soul. See, the strangers are the people of Ziph, and the oppressors are you know the people of Ziph, and also the people, you know, King David or King Saul, and because they have not set God before them. See, the oppressors are those who do not set God before them. Even if I don't care what type of ministry you have as a Christian or as a God's man, if you are not putting God before you continually, then your ministry is in error. Your actions are in error. What you are doing are in error. He says, and David and Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the wood and strengthened his hand in God. And this is what Jonathan said. He says, and he said unto him, fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee. And thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee, that also Saul my father knoweth. He knows that this is what God wants. Remember, Jonathan strengthened him in Saul. He says, hey, this is God's will for Israel. You see, God had already told King Saul that he's no longer going to be king, and when he dies, it's going to be David who is taking over, not Jonathan. And Jonathan, because his eyes and mind are set on God, becomes a great friend of David because of what he's been told of by God. You see, and so now King Saul's like, even my son's against me, even he's turned against me. No. You see, Jonathan is concerned about what God has said. He set himself, his eyes before God. He set God before him, and therefore he knows the will of God. And in fact, all of Israel knew this, according to let's go with 1 Corinthians chapter, if I can find this verse, but basically 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 11. go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Or not Corinthians, I'm sorry, Chronicles. I always get those mixed up. I wonder why. Sorry. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1 through 3.
Chronicles?
1 Chronicles, yes. Now the Philistines, and then all Israel gathered themselves to David and to Hebron, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh, and moreover, so in times past, even when Saul was king, thou wast he that leddest us out and brought us in Israel. You see, while Saul is busy fighting against David, David is busy protecting Israel, what Saul was supposed to be doing. And so they know that. Thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel, and the Lord thy God said unto thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be ruler over my people Israel. Therefore came all the elders unto Israel to the king to Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel according to the word of the Lord by Samuel. So even while David was anointed by Samuel, and all of Israel already knew this. This was not like some mysterious news by this time when David's doing this, is that they know that Samuel has anointed him to be king. Why? Because it's not like David got all this power and then David goes along and says, oh yeah, this is a secret that Samuel told me one time. No, it's like they said, we already knew this. All the tribes knew that David was supposed to be the king. But what happens is rather than keeping their eyes on God, many of these people in the land, like Doeg the Edomite, seeking his own desires and creating mischief to destroy the people of the priest of Nob, and then also the Ziphians, who did not pay attention to the news, did not seek out the will of the Lord, and just said, oh, the king's looking for him, let's hand him over. It doesn't matter if David protected us, let's hand him over. That was their attitude. They did not have God before their eyes. They did not have God before them. And so here in 1 Samuel chapter 23, he says, And now behold, I know that thou shalt surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord that thou wilt not cut off my seed. No, that's actually it's chapter 24, verse 20 is that even King Saul is acknowledging this. He says, Now behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. He knows this. This is why Saul is mad at him. And he finally admits the truth. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, that thou wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home, and David and his men gat him up into the hold. And so we understand that this whole situation is because Saul is in rebellion, and David is doing what is right, but because he is not submitting himself to God and God's will, that the children of Israel are suffering because of it. And so when we're busy fighting our own battles, and we're fighting against God, and we're trying to fight against God's men, then we are going to be we'll end up neglecting God's people. And so that's not a good situation to be in. We need to be focused on the reason why God anointed us. If you were anointed into a position, if you were ordained as a pastor or something like that, then you need to be focused on the ministry that God has given to you. You cannot be busy seeking out and looking after other people's business. Now, here in this passage, we're going to see where David, of course, confronted Saul. See, there's a legitimate reason to confront people, but not to attempt to destroy them. See, we confront people to edify and restore. We do not confront people to cast down and destroy. That's God's job. And so here we see in this passage, in 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 18, and they two made a covenant before the Lord, and David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went to his house. Then came up Ziphites to Saul in Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself with us in strongholds in the wood, in the hill of Hitchah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of thy soul, to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. And Saul said, Blessed be ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. You love me and have care about me. So I pray you, prepare yet, and know and see his place where his haunt is, and who hath seen him there, and it is told me that he dealeth very subtly. See therefore, and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hideth himself, and come yet ye again to me with certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall come to pass that if he be in the land, that I will search him out throughout all the thousands of Judah. Notice this. The Ziphians are of the tribe of Judah. These are David's men. These are David's people. This is his tribe. And yet he's betrayed by them. So you see, even though that they are part of his brethren, if you will, his tribe, they're against him. And so in this sense, they're like strangers. Here they are supposed to be the people that know the will of God. Everybody knows the will of God. Saul knows the will of God. Jonathan knows the will of God. Samuel has declared the will of God to Israel. And all these, and then even the tribes, the leaders of the tribe, when they come to David, and they say, we knew the will of God for you. And all these people knowing the will of God, these people, the Ziphians, they did not care about the will of God. They only saw, okay, where's the best advantage? Here's David with 600 men. Here's Saul with 3,000. And what will be our best advantage? They're always checking the numbers, trying to see what side they should be on, about who's the strongest and who got the most advantage and how can they get the advantage out of it. They're always strategizing and seeing. And the problem with these type of people is that they're strangers to the will of God. Why are they strangers to the will of God? Because this passage says, for strangers are risen up against me, and oppressors seek my soul. They have not set God before them. You do not set God before you. You are a stranger to God's people. Saul estranged himself to God, and therefore God gave him over to his own to that evil spirit. And so we need to understand that the problem here is that not that David was in rebellion, but rather that Saul was in rebellion against God, and therefore this conflict took place. A lot of times when you see conflicts between two supposed men of God, and there's not like a clear-cut, there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut distinction, this guy gets his arguments, that guy gets our, and they don't just like, Bible says if you see a heretic, reprove him once or twice, then mark him and have done with them. You don't spend years and years fighting back and forth over each other. That's not godly. You rebuke them twice, you mark them to make sure that people know that they're in rebellion against God, and then you move on in your ministry. Here, Saul cannot move on. He doesn't say, this guy is, whatever, don't have anything to do with them, and then I'm going to go fight the Philistines. No, he's busy fighting this, and David has to fight the Philistines. It says, see therefore and take knowledge of all the lurking places. And they're looking around, and arose and went to Ziph before Saul. But David and his men were in the wilderness of Moab and the plain and south of Jeshurun. So they ended up being able to leave. And Saul also said unto the men who seek him, and they told David wherefore he came down to a rock and abode in the wilderness of Moab. And when Saul heard that he pursued after David in the wilderness of Moab, and Saul went into his side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain, and David made haste to get away for fear of Saul, and Saul and his men encompassed David and his men round about to take them. But there came a messenger to Saul, saying, haste thee and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. So here he is again, so focused on getting David. Now the Philistines are able to get back into the land. See, if he had left David alone, then David, even if he was off doing his own thing, David could have protected the land. But because he's so busy fighting against God's anointed, that he is causing destruction to come upon the land. And so, wherefore Saul, finally coming to his senses for once, wherefore returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. Therefore they called that place Shalahal, whatever that word is. And David went up from thence and dwelt in the strongholds of En-gedi. And so, and then of course in this next chapter, he goes back, and it came to pass when Saul returned from following the Philistines that he was told from saying, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to seek David, his men, upon the rocks of the wild goats, and he came to his sheepcotes By the way, there was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately. So we see here that God has delivered him into his hand. Verse 4 in our psalm, it says, Behold, God is mine helper, the Lord is with them that uphold my soul. So he's able to, even though Saul is attacking and fighting, and he's on the lam, and he's trying to, the situations come up not once but twice. He says, David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately, and it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. See, a man who's truly got God's heart, he does not delight in doing anything against other men of God. See, the guy whose focus is only on himself, only on his supposed ministry. Look at the great things I did for God, and look at all the great works I've done in your name, and look at my ministry, and look at all these people who are against me and all this stuff. And their self-pity, and you have compassion on me, I'm going to help destroy you, and all this stuff. All this drama, if you will. Here David does one little thing, not even against Saul, but against his robe, and then his heart smote him. It was not a fun thing for him to do. He did not delight in doing this, and because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master. And the Lord's anointed to stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So even though David is anointed by Samuel, Saul is out of the will of God. He's not focused on the Lord. David is focused on the will of the Lord. And yet, his reaction to doing even the most little thing against Saul is that I should do this, God forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. He doesn't go around saying, well, that Saul, he's in rebellion, he must not be saved at all, his anointing is null and void, it is, all these excuses that people do because of the crazy stuff somebody does who is rebellion against God, who originally was in the will of the Lord, but then got out of the will of the Lord. Rather than trying to restore such a person, they're always taking pleasure in casting the person down, trying to cast blame on the person's individual. But rather than that, David, when he even does the littlest thing, he's like, hey, just because I'm anointed of the Lord to do something does not remove his anointing. Even though Saul is out of sorts with the Lord, and the Lord has given him over to an evil spirit, that anointed is still there. It was all it would do is that Saul should have said, God, I did wrong. I was in rebellion. I understand that David will be the next king. Let me do all that I can to usher in David. That's what he should have done to get back into the will of the Lord and to put God back to his face. But because he was so concerned about his own desires, his own will, that he was so focused on destroying him. But David is like, hey, just because I have an anointing from the Lord does not negate his. He just needs to do what he's supposed to do. So David stayed his servants with these words and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. David also rose afterwards and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My Lord the king. And when Saul looked up behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. So notice when he's confronting King Saul. He doesn't go up and say, look at you, you fool, you're in rebellion. No, he humbles himself. Remember, God gives grace to the humble, God resists the proud. And so when we confront somebody, we need to do it humbly. We need to do it righteously in accord to God's will. Because that person, whatever we may think of them, is if he's in a position, in an office, in a church, or if he's in authority, or if he is in a position that God has placed upon him, or God's people has placed him in that position, even if that guy's out of the will of the Lord, if that guy is ordained by God to be in that office through the hands of the church, or through however God desires to have it, he says, then that guy has an office, that guy has a position. Because he respects the anointing of the Lord, he's not going to hurt Saul. Because we respect the office of the pastor, we're not going to attempt to hurt the pastor because of the office that is being held. And so forth with the deacons. And so that's why the Bible talks about giving double honor, not receiving an accusation against an elder except by 2 or 3 witnesses, making surety of it. And then when you're doing it not to take away the person's elder. Oh, that guy did such and such wicked thing. He must not even be saved. No, the church says, hey, here's our verdict. It's time for you to leave the church and treat him as if, not that he is, but as if he is a publican and a heathen, and so forth, until he gets right. And then they're supposed to restore such a one. But here he says, David arose afterwards and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, my Lord, the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. And David said unto Saul, wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, behold, David seeketh my hurt? You see, he's focused on men's words, men's mischief. Doeg the Edomite making mischief. He's thinking about, oh, that person said this thing about me. That person said that thing about me. He did not go directly to David to find this thing out. It all festered in his soul, and when he got mad about all the rumors and the gossip he heard about David, he tried to kill David. Several times with his javelin, and then several times not here, and killing the people that helped David, all because of rumors that he heard from other people, and not directly from David nor from God, because he's focused on the gossip that he hears from other people. And that's the problem when people get into these ministries. They start hearing, oh, such and such pastor doesn't like you, such and such pastor this, or such and such minister that, or such and such ministry did this, and then rather than checking it out for themselves to confirm everything by the 2 or 3 witnesses, they're like, oh, how dare they? I must go out and fight against them. Oh, how dare they? They're trying to bring me down, and I'm doing all these great works for God. How dare they do this? And then rather than focusing on what God says and doing His will, they're busy focusing on what man says and trying to defend their own will. David said to Saul, wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, behold, David seeketh thy hurt? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen. You are seen with your own eyes, how that the Lord hath delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave, and some bade me. If I listened to men's words, you would be dead right now. See this? Some bade me to kill thee, but mine eyes spared thee, and I said, I will not put forth my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. That's the tempting thing, is to get involved in other men's matters outside of this church. To say, oh, I could get such a reputation if I side myself with this group over that group and attack that person, and then I can get a big following or all these different things, and then I will, by strife, bring people into my ministry. And that's not the way to do it. He says, I will not put forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see ye the skirt of thy robe in my hand, for now, notice this, he's saying my father. Remember, he is the son-in-law. He married Michal. He is the son-in-law of him still, but then later on in chapter 25, Saul gives his wife to somebody else, and that's another story. But the Lord judged between me and thee, and the Lord avenged me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. See, I'm going to let God decide who's in the right and who's in the wrong. I'm going to let God vindicate me. Behold, God is mine helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in truth. See, I'm going to let God's truth determine who's right or wrong in these situations. I'm not going to get involved in all this drama between 2 supposed pastors that are doing God's will, and they fight each other and all this stuff and all these different things that are going on, because God's truth will win out in the end. We just need to be focused on God and His ministry. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. I'm not going to raise my hand against an anointed pastor. I'm not going to raise my hand against a person ordained to an office. That's not right. And especially, I'm not going to raise my hand against God's servants. Because if I raise my hand against a person, against God's servants, then I'm raising my hand against God. See, that's why we've got to be very careful. Now, there are situations where David confronted Saul twice, and then also Saul confronted Peter. But these were not so that they could cast them down, that it was so that they could edify them and restore them back to the Lord. And afterwards, when the king of Israel, he says, and the Lord judged between me and thee, and verse 13, he saith unto the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. See, wickedness proceedeth from the wicked. So if we're not wicked, we better not be doing wickedness. After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea? The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of my hand. You see, Saul thought himself a big man, but David thought himself a flea. We should decrease, but God should increase. You see, how do we think of ourselves? Do we think of ourselves humbly in a ministry, or do we think of ourselves some big man in a ministry? Do we think ourselves in our position as a Christian, some big shot, or do we think ourselves as some humble person, humbly doing the will of the Lord? And it came to pass when David made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, Saul said, is that my voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. This guy is emotionally unstable. If you ever take a look at it, he is emotionally unstable. But you never see David going around saying, well, that King Saul, he has an evil spirit on him from God. Hey, that King Saul, he's emotional. King Saul, at one time he thinks he's an enemy, another time he thinks I'm a best friend. He's bipolar, man, I'm telling you. He doesn't go around insulting King Saul. He treats him as a father. What does the Bible say? Treat the elders as a father, and the younger men as brothers. And he said, David, thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, for whereas I have rewarded thee evil, and thou hast shown this day that thou dealtest well with me. For as much when David had delivered me into thine hand, for as much as when the Lord had delivered me into thine hand, thou killest me not. He acknowledged that God delivered him. For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good for what thou hast done unto me this day. And now behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. And so he understood this, and yet even though he understood that, after the situation in Nabal in chapter 25, again in chapter 26, the same thing happens. The Ziphites came unto Saul in Gibeah, saying, doth not God hide himself in the hill of Hitchiah, which is before Jeshurun? This whole situation happens, and yet here are the Ziphites ignoring exactly what God wanted to do the first time, and going about doing the same thing again. Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul pitched in the hill of Hilshah, from which before is Jethron by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul had come in very deed. He's doing the same thing again. After this whole thing supposedly was all forgiven, he's rehashing old stuff. He's coming back out again saying, well, maybe that was just a fluke. Maybe all these people, you see, he's back here listening to people again. He's back hearing the rumors again. Oh, you know what he did to Nabal? You ever hear what he did to Nabal? He destroyed Nabal's land, and he took his wife, and he did all these things to Nabal. Nabal's a fool. But he probably takes the idea. If you read the story about Nabal, you can see David's side, but you can see how somebody would twist that and say, well, David took all the lands of Nabal and his wife. Notice how that they switch all these things around, and the Ziphites trying to get him to take David again, even though it didn't work the first time. And David arose and came to the place where Saul had pitched, and David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner, the son of Ner, the captain of his host, and Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him. Then answered David and said unto Abimelech the Hittite, and Abishai the Zerah, a brother to Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with thee. And David said to Abishai, come to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster, but Abner and the people lay round about him. See, when you don't care about the will of the Lord, nobody else really cares about you. Everybody's asleep. There's no guard watching. There's nothing. Everybody's like, whatever. This is a fool's errand. I'm going to bed. You know, David's a flea. He can't do nothing against us. You see, they didn't think that David could do anything against them, so why even keep a watch? They don't even care about the Philistines. You see, the people that are focused on their own desires, they don't even care about the will of God. They don't care that people are being harmed in the land. They're busy fighting their ghosts, fighting the fleas in the land. You know, the people that follow after them don't really care. And then Abishai said, David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once. I will not smite him the second time. It's like, hey, tell you what, we'll just do it one time. Come on, just one time. You know, we don't have to do it a lot of times. You know, just attack him once. Just a little spear stab. You know, it's like, hey, you know, this has already happened. You already warned him once. We need to do something more serious here. You know, stab him once. You know, in the heart. Get it done with. And don't need a problem with it. You see, a lot of times people say like, okay, enough is enough. You know, you attacked me once. You pretended to forgive me, and we got it all on the path. But then you're rehashing old stuff. Now I'm really going to take out the weapons on you. I'm going to show you what I was having in reserve. I'm going to show you what you know, that's the attitude. Is like sometimes men of God can kind of like get over it once, but then, you know, fool me once, shame on me. You know, fool me twice, and shame, and third time's not going to happen again, or whatever. But that's the way a lot of people are. This tit for tat thing going on. But David said unto Abishai, destroy him not. For who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? You see, this is the thing, this is the problem with a lot of pastors aren't getting today, when they're doing this fighting back and forth among God's people, is that, yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way to rebuke somebody in the Lord, to edify them and to restore them back to the Lord and all this different stuff. But here it says that, destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? You're going to be held responsible for what you do, even if that servant is in rebellion. Do you go about trying to attack that person after the flesh? You say, oh, that guy's fighting against me in the flesh. I'm going to fight back with him in the flesh. And then God's going to hold you guilty for that. Is it because you're fighting against somebody in an office that God has pet? And you see, you need to do what is right in spite of what they're doing. We need to do what is right because we're serving the Lord. And because they're doing something wrong does not give us justification to do something wrong against God as well. David said, furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him. See, notice this, that David is not like, oh, I just hope he becomes a good person. No, David says, it's not going to be me that does it. It's going to be God that does it. See, that's the difference between the desire of David and the desire of a lot of people, is that they try to go about in their flesh to attack other men of God. But then David says, no, it's going to be God's truth that does it. It's going to be God that does it, not me. It's not me that's going to go fight against all the heresies of the world. It's going to be God's truth. When you proclaim truth, it defeats its enemies on its own. He says, the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him. You know, see, David doesn't want Saul to be around either. You know, David wants God to smite him, though. That's the difference. David is focused and trusting on God. Saul is focused on trusting in what his power can do. As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into the battle and perish. And that's what, of course, he did. Eventually, he descends into battle and perishes. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go. You see, when a pastor is out of sorts with the church, it is not necessarily the obligation of other pastors to bring that guy back in line. It's not necessarily the obligation of other churches to bring that other pastor back in line. It is the job of the church, in the Spirit of the Lord, to judge their pastor. See, that's the problem with a lot of American and other churches, that they're so busy attacking other pastors attacking pastors, when it ought to be the church handling the responsibility of disciplining their pastor through the will of the Spirit. It's not my job. Obviously I can stand up and try to edify another pastor. I can try to correct another pastor and help him out to bring him back and close to God and to edify him as a brother in Christ. But it's not my job to go about trying to slay other pastors. Look at him. He doesn't do ministry like I do. Look at him and all these heresies that he has. It's my job to smite him. No, it's his church's job to do that. And that's why pastors that are starting churches are supposed to have a sending church. Now, if something goes on with me before this church is organized, it's my sending pastor that got it. It's his job, that church, to discipline me. And if a church is organized and they have a pastor in an office, then it is that church's job to discipline that pastor. It is not the job of every Tom, Dick, and Harry pastor out there to come and observe my ministry and say, that John Young over there or that XYZ pastor over there is not doing the way I would do it. In fact, he's doing against he's not following this command of God, he's not following that command of God. No, what they can do is they can call me up privately and say, hey, here's some advice for you. Here's the way I can help you out. Hey, did you know that God's Word says this? Hey, can I help you out in better managing that area? See, they're helping me as a servant in the Lord, not as trying to cast me down, but to lift me up. And if there's some great concern, perhaps maybe they can talk. There's something they can do. But it ought to be, if the church is in the Lord's will, that church will already be taking care of that concern. But if that church is not taking care of the concern, that's a heretic church, and you don't even need to worry about the church at all. Just write them off once or twice and ignore the church. Don't worry about it. I'm just like I'm not even going to worry about Westboro Baptist. That's not even a real church. Whatever. It's like there's no point in me fighting against them. It's like they're other than to say that, hey, don't pay attention to them or whatever. But anyway, the Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take now the spear that is in the bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. So David took the spear and the cruse of water from Saul's bolster, and they gat him away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, neither awakened, for they were all asleep. Because a deep sleep from the Lord has fallen upon them. When you don't care about the Lord's will, you're not going to be revived. You're going to be dead. You're going to be sleeping. You're going to be asleep at the will. Then somebody needs to give you revival, and the Lord put a deep sleep on those who are not doing the will of the Lord. Then David went over to the other side and stood on the top of the hill far off, and great space between them. And David cried unto the people and said to Abner the son of Ner, saying, Answerest thou not, Abner? Abner answered and said, Who art thou that criest to the king? Notice this, that he doesn't direct, this second time he doesn't direct it to Saul. He directs it to Saul's captain of the host, Abner. It says, hey, you're not doing your job. You're not protecting the king. You're not taking care of the king. You see, this is where I'm coming in with the fact that the church ought to be taking care of their own pastor. And then David calls out to Abner, the captain of the host, the guy in charge of his host, and says, hey, you're not taking care of that king like you're supposed to. He says, David said unto Abner, Art thou not a valiant man? Who is like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept the Lord the king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy Lord. See, Satan is out about to get and destroy your pastor. Are you watching after your pastor? Are you helping your pastor? Are you edifying him? What's going on? Are you edifying the officers of your church, a deacon or person in charge of ministry, or what are you doing? And if you are not paying attention, you're in deep sleep allowing heresies to continue in your church. What are you doing? He says, Art thou not a valiant man? He says, This thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, yea, ye are worthy to die, because ye have not kept your master. You see, it's the church's job to keep the officers of the church. The Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. And Saul knew David's voice, and said, Is that thy voice, my son? And David said, It is my voice, Lord, O king. Notice the father direction is gone now, because of course, chapter 25, he gave away his daughter. He gave away Michal to somebody else. Verse 25, verse 44. But Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Phatai, the son of Lachish, which is of Galem. Now therefore let not my blood, he says, and he said, Wherefore doth my Lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is mine hand? Now therefore I pray thee, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant, See, he defends himself. What have I done? Give me reason why you're attacking me. There's not a problem asking people, why are you attacking me? Why are you fighting against me? We're both servants of the Lord. I'm not going to attack you. See, that's the true heart of a servant following after the Lord. Now therefore I pray thee, let my Lord King hear the words of his servant. If the Lord hath stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. So if God is against me, then I'll give him an offering and I'll try to make it right with God. But if they be the children of men, see, it's the children of men that Saul is focused on, and those are who are gone against him. The children of men are not the children of God following after the Lord, but following after men's devices. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord. If God is against me, I'm going to make it right with God. But if it is men who are against me, then I hope God curses them all. It's like we're talking about impregnatory prayer. Cursed be they before the Lord, for they have driven me out to this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. You see, this is the problem with a lot of people, is that when they're focused on attacking other people, their salvation suddenly comes into stake. It's like, I say, if somebody who's in error and becomes jealous of another pastor or another ministry, they're always going to go after their salvation. Oh, you're not saved. You need to go serve another God. You're not serving my God. How oftentimes, you're not really serving God. You're serving an idol. You're serving something else. They want to... Why? Because the Bible says to do good unto your brethren, of course, to bless and curse not your brothers and stuff like that. And so they say, well, how can I make it so that I can attack this person in the flesh? Oh, I can make it so that he's not my brother. He's not a servant of the Lord, so it's fine. He's an enemy of God, so it's fine if I go and attack him. And that's not the way it ought to be. It says, for they have driven me out this day from abiding the inheritance of the Lord. They're denying that I'm even part of God's heritage. They're denying my salvation. They're denying that I have an inheritance with the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Go worship an idol like you are, you heathen. You're an infiltrator. You're a heathen. And they pushed him out. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one doth hunt a partridge in the mountains. Then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no longer do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. See, it's all about him. Oh, you did something nice to me. Now I'm going to do something nice for you. Oh, it's not about the Lord. I will no more curse thee or cause thee harm, because my soul is precious in thine eyes. This day, behold, I have played the fool, and have erred exceedingly. You bet you did. But anyway, David answered and said, behold, the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and fetch it. The Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness, for the Lord delivered thee unto my hand today, but I would not stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. See, verse 23 is something that you guys really need to focus on, make sure that you get, is because the Lord is going to render to every man his righteousness. He's going to recompense your way upon yourself. If you do evil to others, you yourself will receive evil. And if you are righteous, then he will recompense that upon you. If you do right, then he's going to do right by you. And his faithfulness, for the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. God gave me situations where I could easily destroy you in the flesh, but I want to do it because you're anointed by God. And behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set by the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said unto David, blessed be thou my son David. He's still calling him son, even though he gave away his wife. David's not calling him father anymore, but he knows how delusional this guy is. He doesn't even realize what he already did. It's ridiculous. But anyway, then Saul, I'm getting the flesh against Saul. That's not good. So much for that. Anyway, then Saul said unto David, blessed be thou my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned into his place. So we see there that he returned into his place, and then And David said in his heart, I shall now perish this day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. So he ends up going, and there's another story. But going back to our Psalm 54, he says, after everything is said and done, he says, Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with them that uphold my soul. He shall reward evil unto mine enemies, cut them off in thy truth. I will freely sacrifice unto thee. Remember, it says, if I offended the Lord, I'm going to sacrifice to him. Remember, the sacrifices he's talking about here are Psalm 51, verse 17, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise, and do good unto thy pleasure unto Zion. Build thou the walls of Jerusalem, then thou shalt be pleased with the sacrifice of the righteous. So we see the sacrifice that God is seeking and that David is going to offer is sacrifices of a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, and God will not despise them. And it says, I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. Remember there in Psalm 50, Whoso offereth praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation right, I will show the salvation of God. That's physical and spiritual. That is any type of salvation you want from the Lord. If you offer praise to the Lord and order your conversation right like David did, then he will show you his salvation both eternally and in tribulations. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. And I will wait on thy name, for it is a good for thy saints. He says in verse 6 in Psalm 54, he says, I will freely sacrifice unto thee. I will praise thy name, O Lord, for it is good. For he hath delivered me from out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies. Remember what David said was that don't lay a hand on Saul because God is going to smite him. And then he says, perhaps it'll be because of this or that or other reason, and perhaps he'll descend into battle. Eventually, Saul does descend into battle and is slain by his own sword. And so we see that because of his evil, destructive ways, God recompensed his righteousness upon him. And God recompensed his evil upon him. See, God cut him off in his truth. See, we as God's people need to realize that God will save us by his name because he is righteous, he is strong. And so if we follow after the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, we call upon the name of the Lord in righteousness and truth and in sincerity and give God the sacrifices of a broken spirit and a broken contrite heart, not only just for eternal salvation, but also in our serving of the Lord as servants of the Lord and doing his will, then God, when people come up against us, when strangers come along, we're just doing the ministry of the will of the Lord, and we're doing what God has called us to do as individuals, going soul winning, or just studying the Bible, or in relationships with each other as we live life. And then all of a sudden these strangers come along and say, well, you're that Christian person, or you're that whatever person, and you shouldn't be doing this, and they start fighting against you for seemingly no reason. Like, who are the Ziphs? I mean, come on, who do we even think about the Ziphs? It was these people that all of Israel already knows that he's anointed to be king, and yet here Doeg the Edomite gets involved trying to create mischief. The Ziphs get involved trying to create mischief, and then Saul starts hearing all these peoples and all these rumors against David, and then starting to fear that he's going to be cut off, and all these ridiculous fears, and he allows his flesh to well up within him. He stops focusing on the coming kingdom of the Lord, quits focusing on the will of the Lord by Samuel. He quits focusing on those things that he's supposed to focus on, and he gets his eyes off of that and onto the world, and he says, oh, look at all these rumors and gossip. David's going to try to kill me. David's going to try to do this. David's going to try to do that. I got to destroy the people that are helping David. I got to destroy all these people. We need to get off of that mindset of the flesh and get on the mindset of God will protect us. God will cut off those people in his truth. If we're doing what God has told us to do, then God will take care of our enemies. It's not our job to fight against them. Now, if we want to go and it's like a Saul comes up against us, and then we want to go and say, hey, why are you fighting against me? Don't you understand what you're doing is wrong? And if we want to do those things, trying to encourage them to stop doing evil, then that's fine. That's not a problem. But when we go about trying to attack others, like Saul did, or like Doeg did, or like the Ziphs tried to do, trying to bring mischief upon people that are just going about doing the will of the Lord, because we just have some opinion that, oh, this person's not right, or that person's right, and I want to just destroy his ministry, that's not right. We as Christians should be gathered together to edify one another. We should do all things with the purpose of edification. Because if we don't, then God is going to hear our prayers to recompense those who come against us. He shall reward evil unto my enemies. If you are the enemies of God's person doing the will of God, then you are God's enemy, and He will recompense evil unto you. And so we need to be careful. If we are going to reprimand a person who is in authority in the church or an office, or even another brother or sister in Christ, we need to do it biblically and for the purpose of edification, and not for the purpose of destruction. Because God's job is to destroy those who come against Him, not ours. Ours is for reunification and edification. So the question is today, are you going to be like a Saul, looking and hearing about all the rumors that everybody's spreading about? Or are you going to be like David and say, hey, I'm going to do your will, God, and I'm going to let Saul, your anointed person, your anointed person over here, I'm going to let you take care of him. That's your servant. That should be our attitude. Are we going to be edifying one another and let God take care of those people that fight against us? Or are we going to have a tit-for-tat attitude and say, well, they started it? No, that's not the way it ought to be. It ought to be, they started it and I'll let God handle it. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessings you've given us, Lord. Thank you for the opportunity to study this psalm, Psalm 53, Lord. I pray that you'll help us to trust in your will, to allow your name and strength to save us from all tribulation. Help your name and your strength to save us from the enemies that come up against us while we're doing your will, Lord. You called us to do a will. You've anointed every one of us with your Spirit to do the will of the Lord, the will of saving souls, of reconciling people back to you, Lord. I just pray that those strangers that come up against us, not putting you before their face, will all be recompensed by their evil. Lord, I just pray that you will help us to do your will in spite of them. In Jesus' name I pray.